I think we have one more question to you. Why have you put the two of us in one conversational panel? Because I'm asking this, you know, we have, we never talked, yeah? So we don't know, we know about each other. So, and for reasons, I agree, I like the show at the session, but also the Martin Younger show I've seen. I liked it very much. I never would go so far. This is definitely for me as a curator, probably for you it's different. I never could say this was the best. Yeah. So but this is nothing. Yeah. But it's I like that. The session is not easy. What I think for painting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I saw already several good painting shows there. Yeah.
So far, I think I did just one good show recently, and before I usually make compromises and then I take them to the next one. Yeah.
Yeah. Why have you, you know, the two of us? Hmm?
Yeah, it's very simple.
Yeah.
I thought that might be interesting for me and for the audience as well.
Okay,
yeah,
let's try to entertain a little bit.
Yeah.
So if we will manage this, maybe you should. Another thing that came immediately into my mind: do you consider yourself? Do you describe yourself as a painter or as an artist?
I usually always said artist, also because I didn't study painting actually, or actually not so much, because I started studying with Tim Ulrichs, who is more a conceptual artist, and then I further. Then I actually interrupted my studies to work at the movies, because at that time I did some short movies, and I even had some technical issues, so I started to learn actually working at the movies. I became an electrician, blah, blah, blah. And then at a certain moment, I realized that I want to go back to art, and then I went to the academy in Düsseldorf, and I wanted to study with Georg Herold, actually, who just said, why don't you go to my friend Albert Oehlen? He just started to become a professor. And so that was actually, so I was studying then under Albert Oehlen, but without painting. I started painting after my exam, basically. But now I ended up doing only painting, and since I moved to Vienna, because there even the way of teaching, as far as I know, used to be more, like not now probably, but used to be much more conservative, and so they put everything into categories. And so at that time, at a certain moment, I thought, okay, so now I'm just saying I'm a painter, because actually I'm not doing anything else. But since for me painting is more a way of thinking than actually painting, it is still that I would say I'm an artist and not a painter, but I'm using it now. Yeah.
Interesting. When I talk about artists who paint, I still call them artists.
Yeah.
Because I'm working so much in the North American sector, this is impossible. You know, so then you yeah. So it's an artist who's painting. So and then to the women and painting, I want to come back to this later, because that's a whole tradition, and it's very challenging also, I think, to talk about it, because it's. But is painting at that very moment we are living in still a contemporary form of expression?
I think right now it is, because I think I don't know, it's the way, like I think if you have to tell something, then you choose the media how you work with. But right now, and even as you said before, like anyway, I got some questions about the post-war artists, and I think at the moment it's just you choose the media, and for me it is, I think, since I said for me it's more a way of thinking, and I make something visible, I think actually it is some. I think right now because for me actually I could even do writing, right, and I could do a quote of somebody, but I like to do it visually. It's actually just more my kind of language. So I see it more as a kind of language, and I've chosen painting, and I'm of course doing it in a traditional way. But then this is even a question if art has to be political, and if art can change something in our society. And so I don't think that painting can probably change obviously something in society, but probably it can influence the way of thinking and the way of seeing, and this is, I think, the beginning of everything.
Personally, I understand this, but could you explore a little bit more about the as making is thinking or thinking is making aspect? I think to me it goes hand in hand, because painting still, it comes from it's in visual arts alongside with sculpture, and has the longest tradition, and you have to without technique, which has nothing to do necessarily only with thinking.
No, it's just the way of getting somewhere, right? It's even the way of thinking, probably even the way of writing. Like you think about a lot of words, and then you delete a couple of them, and then you end up at another sentence. And I think the way of writing is probably as a little bit similar than the way of painting. Yeah. So, but yeah, that's just what I think. Or the way of, like, for me, for example, I often describe it that way. Like I say that my paintings can be like words in a sentence, and then of course it's more about the paintings than about the sentence. But it is about what the viewer sees when they see a group of work. It's almost never about the single work, even though during the process I treat the single painting like I treat it like a single work, but basically once there are a group of works, then I know what kind of sentence they should form, and so I look for the other words which I wouldn't look for if the first, let's say, paintings didn't exist. It's a bit like that. So the words which I make in addition to complete the sentence wouldn't exist on their own.
Mm-hmm. You're looking at your work. To me, it doesn't look very Austrian. So it follows in a way. When I saw your the first.
No, even of course here with that work you see, it was actually the entrance of the show I recently did at Marienbowski Gallery. Mm. And so of course if you see the left work, you immediately have to think of Ellsworth Kelly, yes. Of course, and that's what I want, so I play with it. But during the process it just happened, because there will be other works in that show which lets you even see afterwards that painting differently, and that was in a way the goal of that exhibition. So there you see, you have this first impression, so you think you know what to expect in this painting show, and then you go further, you see different works, and even some which are very close to some like female bodies, even though you don't have to see them. Then when you go back, you see the same shape, and then you probably or hopefully cannot see that one anymore. So it's of course a bit about playing with the expectations of the viewer, and I usually like to quote other artists.
Yeah, then it's also, of course,
it's a
I also think we have to talk about this a little bit later, and post-war, especially American art, which indeed comes into my mind. But there must be a fascination also for you on all those post-war.
Yeah, but in a different way. This is actually probably because usually I don't see myself, like people like to use this word of geometric abstraction or something like that, and I really don't see myself in this, in this tradition.
But abstraction as such went twice in the 20th century, was a really political actor. post-war, after 1945, and in the very beginning of the last century. And you know, when the very famous, and we agreed that we go too deep in I don't have a quote even from Alois Riegel, yeah, so who was very important for the Vienna secession, for Austrian art development, Jugendstil, etc. in the early 20th century, that he was extremely describing the symbiosis of thinking and abstraction as a mega political act.
No,
yeah?
I know. But even when I did the show at the secession, I of course took the secession itself as the starting point to think about the exhibition, but I did it in a more architectural way, so I didn't mean the secessionist, for example. Mm-hmm. I was actually quoting Sol Levitt because he did show in the secession, and then, but it would go too far right now, but it was more about, let's say, architectural building, which leads me to my, probably concept or starting point for the exhibition itself, and not in that way of the secessionists.
Interesting. I read this in the other way around. So
that's why I'm saying it.
Which I think is good. Yeah. So I was when I visited the session show, I was not reading the press release, but I did so now in the preparation of this talk, of the conversation. To you, indirectly quoting to you, painting is a process that you work on over a long period of time. Where in your work does process, which I don't understand in your work, process begin? Where does process change? And how does process go forward and backwards? I'm in a way quoting from this press release.
Yeah, of course the press release was not written by me, right?
You see, you should keep control.
I try, but in this case wasn't. But the process, I can simply say, starts with the thought, like thinking is the first step of a process, right? And then the process means just the way of working on a show, and it, of course, if you say forward and backward, then it's more something like deleting some ideas and adding others. And it's probably finished when the show, maybe not even, but let's say when the show is installed, then the process is for that part finished. But then, as I've said in the beginning, I usually always have some compromises or some goals which I didn't reach, and these I just take with me to the next
step.
Yeah.
But it's interesting also was looking about some texts written about you, and there are some beautiful interviews with the Ulrich Luck interview, an example I like very much. But there are not a lot of texts floating around.
No, they are not.
And do you, in terms of controlling your work, looking at your work in general, it looked extremely controlled. Yeah. So is it controlled?
It's not at all controlled. It's really like I start from nothing. Nobody would ever believe it. The only first thought is as I said, the whole exhibition existing as a context, and what I want with this exhibition is the only starting point. But then I think I push the works forward, and even sometimes I treat them also when I install them more as as I would install a group exhibition of works of other artists, and that's also what happens quite often, that I do works which then appear to be like works of other artists, or I have to think of Svenja Deininger and so on, and then I even push the work to this point. And so that's also then the way of installing them. And of course, sometimes I like this. It's not that I think that everybody has to read it that way, but for me it's kind of fun to even think, what does a Svenja Deininger next to like Raoul de Keyser, even if though I never managed the Raoul de Keyser, but I would consider myself even more closer to his way of painting, even though they look completely...
Luc Timers, Raoul de Keyser?
Yeah.
Then Sarah Morris.
Yeah, definitely.
Interesting.
That's...
Agnes Martin?
It would be just a goal, because then later you wanted to ask me about breaking out of some structures. It's just the... at the moment I'm just able to do this the way I do it. It doesn't mean that it has... I think for me always change is something like really important, and things I didn't reach now, I hopefully will.
You should finish then. I sent her my questions before, yeah. So we wanted to be also fair, yeah, for also both sides, and
Definitely.
breaking out. It was for me more. Don't you? For me it's easy. I'm not an artist, yeah. So, but I when I look at your work, I think, my God, this has a form, it has a structure, it has a beginning and an end, yeah. Formally, don't you want to explode, yeah? That to make it more, break it up, yeah.
Actually, these things happen in between. No. And then it's definitely the fact. It's just that I cannot, let's say, stand this way of work like right now, not when I'm doing it. So that's why I definitely erase more than I paint. And then...
on the very painting, or? On the very
painting.
Okay.
And that's why people often, when they visit my studio, so the floor is just covered by colors. Like, these works definitely were made more consciously, because this is a work which exists to another work, and it just does something completely different. In this show I even played with this word of geometric abstraction, because I wanted to have these works in that show, which obviously in the beginning appear to be just geometric and abstract, and then it's about what somebody could see. And that's why I even came to Raoul de Keyser, because sometimes you have you have just some color, and he's not even playing with materiality or different shapes so much as I do. But I like when you are in front of one of his paintings, then you have the feeling that you're in front of a very concrete, let's say even tool sometimes, and everybody has it. So he is able to evoke a certain association, even though nobody could name that tool. And that's something, it's interesting to me I probably would like to the viewer to be in front of something very concrete without being able to name it, and ideally everybody would find the same word or invent the same word. That would be my goal.
That means the viewer, the spectator, the visitor of a gallery is important to you.
Definitely, always. It's even when I watch myself, let's say once at an art fair, I don't remember where it was, in a gallery in London, and then there was a work far in the back of Michael Schorel, who I'm not very much interested in, and then another work next to it, and then a big photography of Tillmans. And still I went to Michael Schorel just because of the way how the works were installed, and because I wanted to see what's next to her. And that's a moment I'm interested in, that I really want to define the way the viewer goes within the exhibition space. And that's even how I treat the single paintings, that I want to define the way what they see first and what they see later, and even this work is then related to another one, and if you see the other one different than the one before.
Are you happy how you are getting contextualized?
Luckily it didn't happen so much right now, and actually no, not so much, that's probably why I then react that way, the way I do.
Okay, to speak it a little bit more bluntly, you are not often on thematical exhibitions.
Yes, but actually not so much. Actually, I think I'm doing more solo exhibitions, much more, and that's actually also the way how it should be. And when I'm invited to group exhibition, then I always try to show a couple of works, of course, because they form to me something. And as long as I live, I really want to define that. I even had some discussion with some curators, because I just don't like that they take my work and treat it as they want to treat it. So I usually try to, don't give away anything.
Yeah, what is the problem with it?
Yeah, it's the problem that it's.
You don't want to be instrumentalized.
Yeah, probably. I even sometimes don't like when the galleries make any suggestions. Like, from the suggestions, I just know if they understood the work or not. Like, let's say Marian Boski once wanted to show me next to Pier Paolo Calzolari, just because our works at that moment have been like kind of very ripped out, white, and so this is an aesthetical aspect. Why to show two completely different works next to each other? So I know she didn't understand anything. So of course I don't like that.
Yeah, but maybe it sells better.
Yeah, I'm not at all interested in that, of course. And but then I was even invited now to show works like, or include, actually what I like to do and also want to do in the future is to do a two-person show, and I choose, let's say, a real Morandi instead of taking one of mine, which is put, or where I try to reach one of his works. As I said, I quote artists before, and then I'd like to do works to this artist. Right now I'm invited for a solo exhibition, and I've chosen 4 works of Streminski. And I get them from the museum in Lodz. And this time I'm doing a show in addition to his paintings. So I start from where he probably finished. I start to develop that show. And that's something I'm interested in, but then I have the complete control of what I want to show and how I want to include his work, and which aspect of his work I will, in a way, mention and so on.
This is also what I have meant earlier with you quoting yourself now, which I like very much, as a keeping control and building up your own context, how you want to be read, and it's tricky. I think for artists working with this specific kind of painting, there is definitely a danger of getting, which which getting in the completely recognized in the completely wrong direction.
Could be.
Yeah. So on that, when it's interesting when you could be also Raoul de Kaiser, so that would be an interesting dialogue to and open up what people are not thinking about, and there is no way of return then, because it's your decision. It could be also done by a curator, So maybe you should trust certain curators more.
That's what they always say.
Yeah.
And
thank you very much. But in that audience here are sitting plenty of curators.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
I can say I try, right? But it's always about the dialogue. Like, once there's a good dialogue and I have the feeling of being understood a little bit, I try to understand the other as well. So it's always interesting, right? Even like now when we two meet each other and.
But going back to the city where you live, as a Vienna, and there are. This is what I liked what Hildegund said. That your show there at this session was for me as well extremely unusual for an artist living now in Vienna. So
but
I don't
I'm also just not only living in Vienna, right? I did a lot of residencies. I lived at so many places. I'm now even traveling in between 3 cities, right? Like I live in Milan and Berlin and Vienna.
Yeah.
And
but you are considered, this
I
is
know, but that's not, I didn't do it, because it's even funny that I'm always the Austrian artist, although I even changed my nationality when I was 18 or something. So I'm actually German. I grew up in Germany. And especially the American galleries, they like to, because it's more exotic to be from Austria than from Germany. and of course Germany has a big tradition. On the other hand, I didn't have many exhibitions in Germany, so and I'm living in Vienna since 15 years, so in a way my career started there, but I also don't know exactly what would be the difference between an Austrian and a German artist.
There is a difference in the context, again, contextualization of a certain, you know, you were talking about Düsseldorf, in which we have that in common, by the way. I'm born in Düsseldorf, and certain, especially, it was not only Joseph Beuys for me, it was when I was a kid, Sigmar Polke, Gerhard Richter, and all those people were surrounded by them, this is probably why I ended up in that what I'm doing today. Yeah? So it was so, I think the context in which we are living is always important. And,
yes.
And I'm not talking about a specific nation, yeah, the German, I also changed my nationality, yeah? Or second one, no, I agree with you. I don't want to. This is also made up from media. Yeah? So the Austrian artists, the German artists, the American, etc. But I would like to go back to post-war art, post-war Western art. And that time, and it was really when the promise of new thinking, of contemporary thinking, from the Western point of view, really everything came from the U.S. So, and the post-war, and that what I learned after Sigmar Polke and Gerhard Richter, etc. Of course, I was fascinated by artists such as Frank Stella and Robert Ryman. Yeah? Really fascinated. That opened for me a new thinking about what art can do. Yeah? So I could, and really, when I was 16, 17, 18, yeah? And then I traveled to the US to see this, and then what I understood, their theoretical. You're not so far. I don't think that you are so far away from them, because it's also the chance between thinking, making art, making painting is thinking. Yeah? So, and then the process of painting comes later. But so what they both Frank Stella and Robert Ryman created bodies of work that understood color and form definitely in a new way. They regarded painting as a form of denial or a thinking against what I think it's very important, or thinking against modernity of this time. Do you include, when you think, not about them, but in general, do you include similar thoughts in your process of painting? And how you use, because your paintings work with color, yeah? You use color and form when you regard a painting complete. You know, such paintings I never could tell you it looks complete, it looks ready. When do you decide this is done? That's it.
Yeah, it's. I don't know when to start thinking about forms. That's actually even something which probably comes out of the fact that I was definitely influenced by this group of Albert Oehlen and Kip Mergelb. I always start with something I'm not confident with, or something disturbing, or of course, like for example, there are many paintings where I use a really intense, deep primary red, and that's because I have difficulties with it, because of course there's this symbolic factor of that color, and so you can never think red without any symbolic meanings, and I'm not using color in any way symbolic-wise. So I'm using it actually more in a photographic way of thinking. I think it's actually also, I often like this combination or this example of, let's say, if you would take a small detail out of a painting, for example, like Matisse, and you have that
shiny blue
shadow and the blue and the white, and you have a bed and maybe like a bed, and then you have some shadows on it, then you see just the bed and the shadow, and you never see the colors, like not consciously, but if you just take that detail, then you can only see blue next to white, probably, like saying it in a very simple way. And so I'm using it more in that way, that I have a certain color, which could be a shadow of something, or it could be wet, or it definitely has some materiality. And that's the way how I use it. So if you probably would paint in a photorealistic way of painting, then I extract these colors I would have to use to be able to show a certain tool or something. And that's, I think, so it's the way I use color comes out of that. And the shapes, I definitely start with completely abstract. Already, like with probably quoting somebody, even like, let's say in the last show, the female bodies, because I never do any drawings. I'm really in the process, and sometimes I leave paintings for a couple of months, and then I sometimes even don't do anything with them, but I know that they are finished, and I didn't know 4 months before. So it's even about my way of working that I sometimes know things and sometimes I don't. Mm-hmm. And or I need this one in addition to another one, but it's like there's, of course, first of all, definitely nothing planned, because then for me it would be boring to paint it anyway, because it's not about making a picture in a way. And yeah, I forgot where I wanted to go, I have to say.
When I would do a show curating, I was not talking about a one-person show, but a one-person show is always the most challenging, also for the curator, by the way. Yeah, and thinking, doing creating a group show with painting only, this is very tricky, very complicated, and the artists who come. When I looked at your work a bit more closely, came into my mind, it was the first, I thought about Gerwald Rockenschaub, Philip Taff, Jonathan Lasker, and Oliver Musset. Yeah. And then I thought, okay, I think this would work together. That would look good together.
Yeah, that's exactly not what I, of course, because I really don't see myself in this kind of, but I usually try, and I think as long as I live, I can decide for that. Luckily, I'm in the position that I just, in the beginning, I say I will not know anything until the day it is installed. And that's luckily, especially in the session, it's very nice, because you kind of get a carte blanche. And so I just told the curator...
Non-curated.
Yes, you can, like, I cannot tell you anything. And right after the session show, like just 4 days later, I had this solo exhibition at the Norton Museum, and that was my first show only with the loaned works. And so this was definitely then, like, I curated a number of already existing paintings, and so I even put them in an order, and that's also why I called it First Impressions, Second, well, how was the title? First Impressions, Second, oh, I forgot. Oh, that's a bit bad. Let's see if I will come to, now I'm already...
Is there any painting with a title?
No, they are
all untitled.
All untitled. Some of them have some working titles, but first of all, they can then later put into another context, and then they form just another sentence. It's like words. You use them in another sentence, and then they make a different content. That's even what I also did at the Norton Museum. So I put already existing works in another context, and they form another sentence. But what I even told the curator then, if one work is not possible to lend from somebody, then the whole selection will change, which was a bit challenging for the museum, because if they once ask somebody and they confirm, they don't like to tell them that now the work is not needed. But that's the only thing I ask for, that I have the control of showing the number of works and building what they should do. And yeah, until now I don't have the experience of having it curated by somebody.
thinking about. As recently, I worked with two female artists who paint, and curated two shows, two in Canada. One of Svenja Deininger, you probably don't know, is a First Nation artist. And another one with Sarah Morris, which couldn't be different in that what they are doing. Yeah? So, but how they think and how they describe themselves as feminists and as opposing to that everything what men have done. Yeah? I find that very interesting. No? So Sarah, I like Sarah Morris' work. Yeah, I know that.
No, me too. Yeah.
Yeah, it's good. Lots of people don't like it. Yeah, they think it's just decoration. But if you think about women who paint, so is it true? As in, I'm quoting now Sarah Morris, but also Svenja Deininger. Do you think it's more complicated to get accepted in that very still male-dominated world of painters?
Probably it's a bit a personality question. At the moment, let's say that it is a fact that there are more artists than female artists, like male artists than female artists in the art market. And so definitely I think that's a kind of fact, and even if this changes, but you can always see if you go to the academies, there are many women, but more I think it's even due to the biography, because of course as a woman you have to deal with if you want to become children. I don't know many like female artists who have children, like just recently that happened, but there's even this, I remember that interview with Tracy Emin, that she just realized at a certain moment that it was too late, and so even me, I don't have any children because I wouldn't know how to manage my time, which is completely, there's just nothing left, unfortunately. So I think if you really, but then there's always the question if you see it market-wise and you have to make a living out of it, or if it's just about, and if even there are many, let's say recently there are many female artists who are discovered, especially now there are these female artists who are always putting brought in that context of having done almost the same work at the same time like male artists, they were just not recognized. So all these shows, I think they come up recently much more than before, and it's because of that question of feminism. I think it has also something to do with the market. Yes, so as said, it's a market question more than seeing it content-wise. But I'm not, in my work, I'm not dealing with that question. If I quote somebody, then I quote female artists as well as male artists. Okay. But of course, if you want to look back, then you find just more male examples, because there have been just more male artists known than. No, I know, but I think I think it would also have been wrong if I wouldn't ask this question. So being in a way it's a no-go. I am personally not thinking about this at all. Yeah? So I should as many women as men, because you just can take, like there was this exhibition at the Wien Museum of Peter Parkish, and he showed, he didn't show any, she just showed once or probably twice Maria Lasnik, but she was just the only one who was not part of his gallery, while he was showing all the other male art. There was just not one female artist in the whole show. And and it's, even recently there was this question discussed with Florian Waldvogel, I think, but it's not. Let's say it's not my theme in this way, but mine of course. Also not. We can. Let's. It's, but it's still relevant to talk about it. But it's also not my theme. So I think, oh God, in which time I've been stupid. But when it comes to
in a way, Sarah Morris really impresses me always.
I think there are some work, for example, Agnes Martin.
Yeah.
I have to say, for me, it is a very female work. I have the feeling that there's a kind of sensitiveness which I couldn't find in the work of a man. Oh, yeah. And so I think it's clear that Agnes Martin's work is a female work in a way. It's my personal point of view, but.
Where do you want to go? Also, what you said earlier, and I like that very much, that you want to keep more control, how you want to be contextual. Also, you show you, and I only can support this. I think you must do this even. Well,
let's say I like to be in non-painting shows. That's usually what happens, and I'm quite happy about it, because then it means it's about another content. And so I usually prefer not to be in too many painting exhibitions.
Yeah, but usually painting exhibitions.
But people do that, yeah.
A lot in commercial galleries, mainly.
No, also in museums.
Yeah.
Yeah. Krems. Anyway.
Yeah, who goes to Krems? No? Yeah, I also I did in 2003. I curated a show. It was a little bit fun of it, and I don't want to be anecdotal. I wanted to do a blockbuster. I was a director of a Kunstverein in Frankfurt. Frankfurter Kunstverein belongs to the big German Kunstverein, and I called that show Deutsche Malerei 2003. German painting 2000.
I've seen that one.
Yeah, it was more, and I did it really as a provocation a little bit, and that it was in that time the most successful exhibition in terms of numbers I have ever done. Yeah, in this until 2003.
But especially at that time, there have been quite some exhibitions that way. There was also something in Köln, and then there were always these books where they. Artists now or something, and
no, that came later. That all came later. That was earlier. They tried to copy this concept, but interesting was, and it's a long time ago. It's 16 years ago, and it's still that artists exhibitions with painting are, if you consider visitor numbers, it's the only measurement of success. Are always better visited, than everywhere. Yeah, it's. So on that exhibition, Deutsche Malerei 2003, I don't know, there were, I think, 50 or 60,000 visitors for a Kunstverein, which is usually visited 2,000 people, for a show. It was crazy. I never will forget about this. Now I like the show, after with a distance of 15 years. So looking at it, I think, okay, it's interesting because so much has changed in the course of 15, 16 years in painting. So it was not about German artists
even
only.
Now you can see that very young artists, they just use it differently. They also even use it as a kind of a language. There's a lot of figurative painting right now where it's more about that they express themselves, and they don't mind if they do it via video or if they paint. It's even in Vienna, you can see it a bit, because I remember that when I came to Vienna there was almost nobody painting, because there was still this painting is dead after photography. So right now I was quite surprised how many actually young artists right now express themselves, but of course it's a different way of painting, because they just use it to visualize an idea.
Is this a painting
in a very
or
concrete
collage?
way.
Sorry.
No, it's a painting. It's always a painting.
It almost looks. Oops.
That's abbrechen.
Yeah.
So
before we were discussing that we talked for 45 minutes, we are already a little longer. you know, we can't, there won't be any conclusion. Yeah?
No, never.
So, but this was also not the plan. You know, and it's far too early to embed this in an art historical context yet, I think. It's also shouldn't be, it would be wrong. Yeah? I like those series a lot. Yeah, so could you explore on this?
Actually, like the right painting already existed, and then because I mirrored the form, like the architecture in the Secession, and of course this work for me has always both. It plays with the architectural elements of the, let's say, I started with this exhibition of Sol Levitt, and I realized that he was completely negotiating the space when he worked on the Secession, so he did a wall drawing, but then at that time there were still two architectural elements, like two windows in the space behind the door in the entrance, two small windows. And I was a bit surprised that he was just treating them like they wouldn't be there. And the Secession itself is this really Jugendstil building, and so definitely it deals with forms like curves and circles and so on. And so, of course, at that time there have been even these two windows. And when you entered then the Secession space, which is more a completely white cube with only straight lines, and there have been still these two windows, I was a bit surprised that he negotiated them. So I took this form, and I even measured the size of the windows, and so I did two paintings with exactly the same size and also exactly on the same position of the where they have been once, but they were of course deleted. And so out of that, I started to mirror the space. It would be too far, but I started to mirror the space, and I was dealing with these even round forms. I always had these difficulties even with some more organic forms, because then you automatically want to see something very concrete, like a figure. Like now I liked it, but at that time I had some difficulties with it. And so I took these round forms. You can find them everywhere, even in the paintings. And in this case, I just wanted to do it perspective-wise, that you have, there was a shape of this which is more, which comes from the architecture, and I mirrored them, and they, like here you cannot see them, but it's always the same form. It's just the radius, it becomes bigger and bigger, so it's the other way of a perspective. Like usually it would become smaller, but in this case it becomes bigger. And it's, of course, also if you put them above each other, then you could, you automatically, like, let's say on the other side there is, I did just a very small entrance. It was kind of, I wanted even to become it more narrow, but it wasn't possible because of the restrictions of the Secession that even people with a wheelchair had to get through, so I did it the tiniest way it was allowed. And so when you enter the Secession, you actually just see some small, like, so for me it was even like a small drawing, so you definitely want to go there first and see what's there. And then when you're in front of it, you have this umgedreht, the perspective upside down. I don't know how to say it. And of course also then it reminds you of something very concrete, because next to it there is an obviously architectural form. You don't see it now very well, but there's another painting which is just an architectural element, and this one appears to be like a drawing of a portrait, or like just a face. And so I thought, if this face is next to something which is actually nothing, and then you have these forms which are actually just architectural elements, but in this way, if you put them close and you do just a drawing, people could even think of, I don't want to mention any word, but something concrete.
It's beautiful. Not in a kitschy way. It's nice.
Thank you.
And indeed, it was a great show. And it reminds me, this, this Jugendstil for me is a very it's, for me personally, it's a torture phenomenon, yeah, and I have to look at it all the time. Theoretically, I I get it and I understand it very much. But when it gets in a, this is why I like art, painting. What was in that time, it was, you know, they destroyed the ornamental and the phenomenon of all those Jugendstil in a very good way. So that, also 100 years back, and this is also why I like your.
Yeah, there had to be some Jugendstil element in the secession.
Steel element, I like that. Yeah, it's anyway. Questions?
Do you see the term ornamental or decorative as a pejorative term?
Sorry, I didn't guess it acoustically.
Do you see the term or the terms ornamental or decorative as pejorative, or how do you relate to the histories of ornament and decoration?
In this case, I kind of quoted it, of course, just because of the history of the secession. In general, there's, first of all, for me, definitely a difference between ornament and decoration, because even like ornaments were like they come, if you think of, but that would go very far, but if you think of the pre-Christian way of using ornaments, then they had actually like a content which simple decoration doesn't have. And but mainly I don't think about I never think about decoration, because for me that's it doesn't play a big role, even like, because even that's not my goal, and what people even want to do with a single painting later, it's not my interest, and it's even not my theme, because there of course are people who are playing with this theme, and they could even say something like more is more, or I never actually think about ornament, because if I would use an ornament, then I use it because of its context and not because of the form itself. Does it answer the question?
Thank you very much.